Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining me and Marshall, Dylan, at Re-Written Vintage Rescue. My very first video. I'm so excited that you joined me. I love reading. I love history, American history especially. I love salvaging things and making them new again. I like gardening, homesteading, which is what we're doing out here in the Midwest. And I just have all kinds of interests, but I wanted to share things with you regarding what I'm thinking, and I wanted to get your opinion on what you're thinking and what we should be doing to become more self-sufficient and less dependent on other people, on our government, and just exchange ideas. And I'm hoping we can help each other along the way, learn from each other. This week, one thing I noticed this week is George Washington's birthday was on Monday. The father of our country, the first elected president of the United States. And then I looked on several calendars and I didn't see it on there. And typically you would see George Washington's birthday, Lincoln's birthday, which they may have changed all that for President's Day. But so I also wanted to know, do they still celebrate his birthday in school? So, talk to my grandkids, and there was really no curriculum on that either. So I started thinking about what do I remember about George Washington when I was in elementary school? Well, number one, he had wooden teeth. Number two, he chopped down a cherry tree and then got in trouble, but did not lie and told the truth that he did it. So that showed his character even at that age. And he wore a wig. So the historians can argue whether those things are true or not. I believe that the teeth he did have back then, but didn't wear them very often. The wig, actually, he only wore during ceremonies, is what I've read. And the cherry tree is probably fiction. So, but it was created to tell a lot about his character. So when I was in high school, learned a little more about him, but didn't make a personal connection as to why he would possibly be important to me. College, didn't learn about him specifically, just kind of went over it. So I wanted to delve in just a little bit about George Washington. Who was he? And I learned that at age 16, he was already surveying land and working. And that's admirable. And then by the time he was 22, he led an expedition, which is amazing, by the age of 22. And I wrote some of this down. This is my own writing, so I wanted to kind of follow along. But he began his military career at the age of 22 as a lieutenant colonel during the French and Indian War. And it was during that time that Native Americans were fighting with the French against the British for land in North America. The fort that George Washington instructed his troops to build was called Fort Necessity. And back then, when the British fought, when the colonists fought, when anybody fought, it was like a gentleman's fight, right? Even in the Civil War, you had your North, you had your South, and they marched towards each other in a straight line and just started blasting. Well, George Washington, that went a couple times with him, and he was like, hey, these French and Indian are kicking our butts because they know a lot about fighting in forest and hiding and the surprise attack and things like that. So he learned as he went what would work and what wouldn't, which has helped us immensely in winning our war for independence. But he built this big fort for his troops, Fort Necessity, in the middle of an open field. Didn't try to hide it, nothing, didn't have any place to retreat to. And guess what? It got surrounded by French and Indians and attacked. So they took him prisoner for a while, and that's where he remained and as well as his troops. But he didn't give up. He stayed in the military for a while, and after that, he later served in an expedition of what was then Ohio Territory, but his troops were still no match for Native Americans that were so skilled in warfare. Suffering the humiliation of 2 defeats in what was supposed to be a very promising military career, and let's, as they say, now in politics, let's circle back. Washington didn't come from the most affluent family, actually. His dad left most of his, when he died, his inheritance to George's older brother, who was from another mother. So he wasn't looked upon that, as being, he didn't have a silver spoon in his mouth, let's put it that way. So he had to work his way up. His brother did help him. Though, and left him Mount Vernon, actually. So when he suffered these defeats, it was humiliating. So he left to go back to Virginia. This is something that's really fascinating, that is what he loved, was Virginia and farming. And he was, think of the people back then, like Thomas Jefferson, Ben Franklin. They were inventors. Why? They had to be. They had to be. If you want to eat, if you want a place to live, if you want to defend yourself against attack, if you want to earn a living, you're going to have to be innovative. George Washington was too, and he wanted to farm, and he wanted to learn new farm innovations. He wanted to try out new things, new experiments, and that kind of thing. He was in his element when he was farming. But at that time, there was a lot of grumbling going on amongst the colonies, especially where he was, because they were being taxed to death. The French and Indian War cost a lot of money. It was Great Britain's war clear across the ocean, and so it cost a lot of money. And so the king thought, what? Let them pay for it. I'm fighting this. We're fighting this war over there, so they can keep their land. They're going to pay for it. So he started taxing them very heavily. You may have heard of the Stamp Act, where every little piece of paper was being taxed. That's just like, think of how much copy paper we buy, and then every little piece of it, which I wouldn't doubt that that's not coming, folks, but it isn't yet. So all of this taxation was taking place. And, George he was an entrepreneur. It was costing him some money too. So he joined in. He ran for a seat in the first Continental Congress from Virginia, and he got it, and he joined. Everybody knew George. Everybody knew each other for the most part. They had served together in the military. They knew his character. It started off rebellion. It started off, rebellion. Let's rebel. We don't have to put up with this stuff. And they had, I wouldn't say their demonstrations were peaceful. Actually, Great Britain called it tyranny. They were rebelling. And then it got to the point where they said, freedom. We need to be free from them. They're clear across the ocean. Why are they telling us what to do? That's why we left. Our forefathers left, was to be free of them telling us what to do. We want to worship the way we want. We want to own land. We want to keep what we grow. Let's not go back to this feudal system. So it started getting stronger, that feeling, that want, that craving for independence. And I want to make a point here. It wasn't only Caucasians. There were Germans. There were people there from Scotland, Irish, everywhere had settled in the colonies. African Americans, some were free, some were not. And typically, African Americans, if you look, historians will say they fought for either side that would promise them independence. And you can't blame them. So whichever side offered them the most, that's typically who they fought for. But the point I'm trying to make is that it wasn't just a Caucasian fight. It was so many different nationalities that were now living here, and they didn't want to be ruled by anybody. Okay, so let's keep going. So George Washington was farming. He spent time working his own land. He had dreams of farming inventions and the prosperity he could create with his own two hands, and that led him to run as a delegate from Virginia to the First Continental Congress. In order to push their differences aside, bring all of their resources together, you have to work as one common unit. They needed a leader. Now, you had some who wanted this person, some wanted this person. And typically they wanted whoever was from their area kind of thing, popularity contest. But there was one name that kept coming up that everybody agreed on, and that was George Washington. He was a man of character. Now, back then, the big word was virtue. Virtue. They wanted someone with upstanding virtue to be their leader, who wanted the same things they did and led by example, had an upstanding character, was as honest as the day was long. It was important back then, should still be important now. But back then, that is what they wanted to base their leader on. And so reluctantly, he took the job. The reason it was reluctantly is because he hadn't been in the military for, I think by this time it was maybe 7 years. And he had lost those battles and put his men in jeopardy. And he thought, how can I possibly lead anybody? But he did it because of a sense of duty to his fellow Virginians and to the other colonies that had faith in him. Something I thought was funny that I found was that he went out and got all the books he could and started cramming on how do you lead? How do you lead? And different military strategies. And like I said before, he had learned you can't fight the way you used to. You have to come up with different ways. You have to hide. You have to have resources. You have to be able to be mobile. And so those things did make him a great leader. The first army that served under George Washington, the United States First Army, were volunteers. A lot of them, lots of them, were farmers. We didn't have the resources. We didn't have the training. And so here was this ragtag group of farmers in an army who had all the enthusiasm of the world, but that's about it. And they were going to fight the largest empire at that time, Great Britain, for freedom. The chances are just like hilarious. There's no way they're going to do it. And actually, Washington enlisted the help of a German military leader and a France military leader to help with training, because these men had no training, no resources. Now, this war, the Revolutionary War, went on for 7 years, I believe, maybe slightly more. 7 years, and there were many, many defeats. Small gains, but many defeats. They were just, they were just outdone. The British had too many resources. They had too much training. But we did start making gains. We did start making gains a little at a time, little at a time, little at a time. The one that touches my heart the most is when George Washington crossed the Delaware. What had happened was we had lost ground to German Hessian fighters and had to retreat. Washington's troops had to retreat, and this was in New Jersey. Yes, that was in New Jersey. And so Washington said, we're going back. We're going back. Well, the men are saying, we can't. We're starving. They weren't getting their well, we had no money. We had no money. We'd used all of our resources. See, these men were starving. A lot of them had lost limbs due to frostbite, freezing. They didn't get proper uniforms. They didn't have proper shoes. They came with what they had. They had to use bayonets to fight. We didn't have, their gunpowder would get wet. They couldn't shoot. What are the chances that they could possibly beat these Hessians who were so trained? But Washington had developed a plan where they would ferry themselves down the Delaware at night, cross the Delaware at night, and then surprise attack the Hessians. What's amazing about this is not one American life was lost, and they did win. And they surprised the Germans, and they won. And when news of that got out, that just rallied everyone. It just, can you imagine? You'd be like, yes, yes. And Washington was so inspirational, and his men loved him. He was out there with them. He was out there hungry too. He was out there cold too. He was out there fighting too. And that's something amazing about one of our presidents. It's an amazing fact to know that he was out there too. The cause was that important to him. And at one time he made a speech, hoping I can find it fairly fast. And he said, the prize which will undoubtedly crown patience and perseverance, glory and freedom, peace and plenty to the community, the admiration of the world. And I'd like to think we still have that today. I think we do. I think we have a lot of jealousy of the world today. But boy, we're something, aren't we? The love of country and the gratitude of prosperity is going to be yours. So on Christmas Day, 1776, Washington came up with a plan for his troops to cross the frigid waters of the Delaware River under the cover of darkness to reclaim the New Jersey shore. The Germans, unprepared for the surprise attack, were overtaken by the colonial army without one American life being lost. More battles would eventually be won, and on July 4th, 1776, our country declared its independence from Britain. Much to his reluctance again, George Washington agreed to be the first president of the United States of America. The colonists wanted to make him a king. They wanted to give him a king's title, but he declined. He wanted to be one of them. He wanted to be a citizen of this great experiment. His vision for America was one of a free and prosperous country, and I love this quote, a republic fueled by innovation, self-reliant citizens. That is so important. And I want to talk about that on my channel, self-reliance. We need to, and I'm going to learn along with you. We need to learn together how to do that so we're less dependent. And what does being dependent mean? How does that make us feel? And the use of our own resources. You don't have to be rich. You don't have to be rich. You can use what you have. You can grow what you have and be happy. The pursuit of happiness, that's what we're all after, right? Washington himself lived by those principles. So I just want you to take a little time, think about him, reflect on him. No, he wasn't perfect by today's standards. We can go back in history. He was a slave owner. Did he want to free his slaves? Yes. Did he leave that in his will? Yes. Were they freed? No. Did he have an African American servant who he was very close to? Yes. Was he still a slave? Yes. So by today's standards, no, he was no saint. He was no saint. But what if there had not been a Washington? What if he would have said, I'm staying right here and I'm farming. I have no desire. Could another leader step into his shoes and inspire 13 other colonies to follow his lead? I don't think so. I think leaders like that are few and far between. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I love to talk to you. Please leave your comments. Like it if you like it. I'm no expert. I just love history and love to read about it and love to talk about it. So I hope you'll join me again. And Marshall wants to tell you that this has just excited the hell out of him. So thanks for joining. See you later.